Hey, folks. Welcome to a brand new episode of Huddles by ClearFeed. Huddles is a talk show by ClearFeed where we talk to customer success and support leaders. We talk to them about how they're adapting to the changing communication stack with customers, which is more and more moving towards Slack and Teams. Today's conversation is going to be about accelerating customer success with shared Slack channels with customers. I have three amazing customer success leaders with me. I have Barrett from Bigeye, who was until recently the chief of staff and head of operations at Bigeye. She also set up the customer success team, so it would be great to pick her perspective. Joby is the head of customer success at Chronosphere, and Jeff is director of strategy and operations at Yotascale, but is very closely involved on the customer success and support side. Some housekeeping. A lot of folks have joined, so please add your questions. We'll try and take as many questions as we can as we go through the conversation towards the latter half of the chat. But first, let me kind of come to each one of you, the panelists, and pick your perspective on your journey around Slack with customers. So let me come to Barrett, you first. So what's the journey? I mean, did you adopt Slack? Did you get in Slack at Bigeye, or was it already there when you were in? So how's your journey of Slack with using Slack with customers at Bigeye?
Yeah, so it was already there, but I think that was, we had kind of early founder-led sales, and so the default is just to go to Slack because everyone's using it. You are building your customer base, but it's still small. And that just kind of gives you the most direct line to them. So it was already in place when I jumped in.
And were you doing it with all customers, or with customers above a certain revenue potential? Was it in early stages of the customer life cycle? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I think all customers, I think that's always the question of like, is there a point where you start to say, okay, you have to be like an enterprise level customer to have access to something like Slack, but we didn't get to that point where we were like differentiating between the two. And I think the thing about Slack is we would run POVs. And so with a POV, you really do want that like instant way to connect and get something up and running and troubleshoot. And so Slack was the default there. And so then I think it was kind of a natural progression from the POV into like being a full-fledged customer where we didn't make a change to how we were supporting the customer.
Interesting. And like, I think one thing that was interesting, and we've chatted a lot about this, is that you tried some other channels as well, like intercom, with customers. So why Slack, right? What really started working with Slack, which was something that made you gravitate towards this as a channel of direct communication with customers?
Yeah, so I think, we're all like, if you're using something like Slack or Teams, like that's just very integrated into your work life. And I think something like intercom is not as much, right? You would have to be in the product. It might like not go with your normal flow. So I think for something like Bigeye, which some people were actually not using our UI, it just wasn't like a natural flow. And then I also think when someone is paying attention to your product and like actually doing something with it, you don't want them to stop and then be like, I'm going to come back to this later. So it just was like the quickest, most natural way to get back to people and like keep an open conversation and keep them moving forward. So yeah.
And just from a perspective of who are on these Slack channels from the customer side, who are the typical set of users on the customer side from Bigeye perspective, and who from your team at Bigeye were on these channels and were kind of doing the first line of interaction with the customers and so on?
Yeah, so I think when I first came in, like we didn't really have a customer success function. So it was just kind of everyone was jumping in, which I think is one of the things that can go wrong with Slack is that everyone has access to it versus something like an intercom or Zendesk where you typically have a team that's dedicated to that. So when we first were going, it was like everyone was in there. And I think that's one of the things we did as we kind of established a more formal customer success team, was to actually say, okay, customer success is the first line of response, because you still want it to be this like clear journey. And you don't want, if people are just jumping in, like if the CEO is writing something, there's a good chance he's not going to follow up on it because he has a million other things to do. So I think good and bad things about Slack is people can easily jump in, but then sometimes it's not the right person who's then able to follow up through like a resolution or a final answer. And then on the customer side, I do think it gave access to a lot of people. I think we saw everyone from kind of like the champion or the purchaser all the way through to people that were just joining the team and wanting to be able to schedule time to actually, you know, get a little intro to what we were doing. So I think we found it was pretty broad in terms of who was joining the channel and asking questions.
And like, so of all the benefits that you saw, like what stand out, right, from a perspective of, especially from a customer success perspective. Now, if you talk about hard things like onboarding faster or NRR, were you able to establish qualitatively or quantitatively very clear benefits of this as a channel?
I think maybe not from like an NRR perspective, but I do think from like an onboarding perspective, there's like a notable increase in how quickly people are able to get up and running because they have that quick access to someone that can help them. So I think from that perspective and like an adoption perspective, it felt really productive. It also was productive from, you know, even things just like updates to like product updates or new features. Cause I just think, again, you're like working into the flow that already exists with people. And so people are actually ingesting the information that you're giving them versus maybe an email or something where they're clicking it and moving on. So I think we felt like once we were using Slack effectively, like the onboarding and adoption part felt easier.
Got it. Right. So, and from customer success perspective, this is one important question that a lot of CS leaders think about when they think about Slack as a channel. So to the customer success team, was this a burden that, hey, I need to respond. What if I miss things? A lot of anxiousness, seeds of white right in the left panel of Slack. Was it an anxiousness, or was it like, hey, this is an asset that I'm closer to customer? Just curious to hear a perspective on that.
I think we saw like a shift. I think early on when you really are trying to like prove something out and see these initial set of customers be successful, there was like some anxiousness and like urgency to things, and which is one of the reasons why having anyone jump in, like it doesn't feel good as a customer success manager or anyone in the customer success function to have a CEO answer, or like I won't target just our CEO, but to have someone besides you answering questions or getting to them faster, like that doesn't feel well, and it doesn't imply that you're not doing what you're supposed to do. I think it also can create unreasonable expectations with customers. But yeah, I think you see all those things light up, and you're like, oh, which one do I get to first? There's no logical order. It's a little bit hard to track things. So I think, process around it is helpful. And once it starts to grow to a certain point, it can be a little bit anxiety provoking, I guess.
Got it. And if you have one advice for CS leaders who are thinking it through, whether they should do this and whether they should scale this, what would that advice be from your side?
I mean, my advice is that I don't know how you can avoid offering Slack or some type of support to at least some portion of customers. I think you're going to come up against people that pretty much insist on it. And I personally think that it's really useful, but I do think that the thoughtfulness and structure around it is like absolutely required, or you're just going to find yourself in the weeds with customer questions, and you're not going to get the value out of those questions that you would get when you are putting it through like a more traditional support tool like Zendesk. So yeah, I think it's been really helpful, but I also think it can be really distracting if it's not like implemented well.
One thing operationally that really helped you to kind of get the team on board, and then also from a scalability perspective, gave you the confidence that, hey, this is something that I can scale a lot more?
Yeah. So I think, I think starting with like not even so if we're not even talking about tooling around Slack, I think just having like this resetting the mindset around it and what those like rules are. I think we wrote up a document that was like, this is the first line of response, and this is how we're going to handle things, and this is what the flow is. And I think giving everyone that confidence and clarity that things are being handled. And then I think when you do start talking about tooling, just having Slack turn into something that's a little more of a process and less of like, you're just kind of out answering this and that, I think is helpful. And kind of, it helps also when, they're the smaller customers, you should pay the same amount of attention to them in certain situations as others. And I think there's not that way to like level out questions and
Yeah.
support. So.
Yeah, no, I think definitely very, very insightful. So that kind of brings me to Joby. Now, I think yours has also been a very interesting journey. But like, and we've chatted a bit about it. I think you've tried to merge Slack along with traditional ticketing on Zendesk. But like, I think also the customer lifecycle spans over a period of time. So curious to hear what is the journey of Chronosphere been with Slack, as a first touch point with customers and so on. Especially a really large enterprise customers. So curious to hear your thoughts, Joby.
Sure, no, absolutely. We work with a variety of customers that cut across multiple segments. So some of them are early stage startups that are growing really fast, going into customers that have, dev teams, because our product is more focused for developers. So dev teams that span across, thousands across, across, different countries globally. So as Barrett was saying earlier, we also start engaging with our customers through Slack in the pilot process itself. Mm-hmm. So a lot of early coordination and engagement through the pilot process is run and managed through Slack. And from there, as we convert them to customers, once they move from prospects to customers, the journey continues. The only difference is the addition of a lot more people. And when I say people, like a lot more stakeholders that are very relevant to the rest of the onboarding and adoption processes inside the customer. Mm-hmm. So for us, this is a channel or a medium of communication through the entire life cycle of the customer. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, not everyone on the customer side gets enrolled into Slack. It's either, we have a model, we sell into usually a central team. And after that, the onboarding and adoption processes usually have participation from all their internal stakeholders. So it's usually a little bit of a limited ecosystem where not everyone inside the company is part of that Slack. When I say company, inside the customer ecosystem is not part of the Slack, but still it's a pretty big base that's out there. We have Slack channels that have, definitely hundreds of customer contacts in it. And, we can expect questions to come in from anyone who's part of that Slack.
Got it. And Joby, also Chronosphere's setup is a bit more nuanced, and I think there are solution architects, you have pre-sales, then you have a support team. So how do you manage in terms of who the first line of response is going to be, and across the different life cycle, across the entire life cycle? So curious to hear that thought. And I'm sure this has evolved with time. So curious to hear the journey of this. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it has evolved a lot over the last couple of years that I've been here. And the team has grown a lot over the last 2 years too. So the dynamics and the operational models have changed. Now, as you rightly said, we have the sales engineers, we have the solution architects, we have a technical account manager, and almost a named customer support engineer also for the customer, who is also part of the Slack.
Right.
Now, that kind of takes me a little bit to the type of topics that the customers discuss with us through Slack. Now, depending on the stage that the customer is in, during pilots, these are mostly about learning about the platforms, mostly around some of the pilot related I would say technical topics that are usually targeted at the sales engineers. As we start onboarding them, then the technical account manager becomes the point of contact. The most of the activities revolve around the technical account manager, and solution architect becomes one of the key technical stakeholders through the entire onboarding and the adoption process. They are actually involved a little bit in the pilot process too. Now, depending on the type of topics, and when I say type of topics, they mostly fall into 2 or 3 broader categories. One is very much related to, let's say, coordination and synchronization between the teams. So those are mostly targeted at the technical account manager. And we have pretty well-written internal swim lane guides based on which the TAM or the SA or the support engineer knows whether the topic needs to be picked up. And the customer pod works very closely. So even if let's say TAM is on another call or the solution architect is working with another customer, the support engineer jumps in and chimes in. But there are certain types of topics that the support engineer cannot address. I mean, let's say if there's an enablement session that's scheduled for the customer, and if the questions are around that, obviously it needs to wait for the TAM. If these are very technical from a design architecture perspective, SA knows, it's one of his or her topics. Now for the support engineer, they mostly go with the tactical topics or the break fix type topics. So they jump in, where a lot more of a detailed analysis and technical analysis needs to be done. Then the support engineer knows, that it's their set of topics. So that's how we operate. And all four that I mentioned, like sales engineer, solution architect, TAM, and support engineer, all of them are very, very active up there. And I saw a question from someone who was attending, and the question was around, do we provide SLAs? Yes, we do provide SLAs on Slack now, after we integrated Zendesk and the Slack channels, using ClearFeed. So that's one thing that we offer. We offer production grade SLAs, like how we offer on Zendesk, through Slack also today.
Got it. And are the response expectations faster on Slack, just out of curiosity, as compared to an email? Just out of curiosity, any observations?
It's a good question. Yep. Expectations are a lot more higher when you open up Slack as a channel, because in a Slack is used, or at least used to be, very much an instant messaging channel when it got started, and people have those expectations, though it's supposed to be more of an async communication channel, frankly. So expectations are slightly higher, but when we do when we start the engagement with customers, we set those expectations like really right, because this is not let's not treat this as your instant response channel, because that becomes extremely challenging, because we don't have like a 100% dedicated TAM or a support engineer or a solution architect that's working with the customer. They have at least a handful of more customers that they're managing, so responses can be a little late. The good thing about Slack and the general tactical or break fix type topics is the facility that we provide to the customers to raise a ticket through the Slack itself. So the ticket gets raised, and there is a backend team that's always looking at the tickets based on the priorities. So if it is a tactical topic or a break fix type topic, and if it gets raised as a support ticket through Slack, it gets attended to immediately, if it's assuming it's if it's an urgent or a high priority ticket.
Got it. Right. So if I understand, Joby, you have a mechanism using which customers can raise a ticket from the Slack channel, and then you route it to Zendesk appropriately for the response from the technical support team in this context.
That is correct. Yeah.
Got it. Interesting. And Joby, as you've scaled this and you're scaling it further and further, what are some of the challenges that you are running now into as you're, as you kind of think about, taking it from maybe, let's say 50, 60 channels to, let's say 100, 200, right? So what does the road down the line look like for you? And what are you worried about, and what are you excited about?
The fact that I'm really excited about is the swift response that we can provide. And the team is equally excited about the automation that we have built around this. So customers can interact with us through Slack. I mean, and as we've started working with more customers, we are seeing requests coming in for similar channels to like Microsoft Teams, etc. So the entire customer experience has improved a lot. They literally don't have to go to the support system or send us an email to get going with a support ticket, etc. Now, going back to the challenges that can potentially come up, we definitely need to, we have a lot of expectation setting to have there, because, now company growing and, adding a lot more customers means there are a lot more individuals involved in the entire customer engagement and customer communications part. So setting the expectations right at the beginning of customer engagement is very, very important. We just need to be very sure that, hey, it's not instant messaging. There can be occasions where things can be a little delayed. But the good thing is, if it's anything important, please be rest assured, or the customer can be very well be assured that the response is going to be like immediate from the support team. So that's definitely there. Now, with all the automation that we built in, frankly, I don't see a huge challenge, or not too concerned around the scaling that we expect in terms of adding hundreds of customers into our base. So that's working out fairly good.
Wow, that's great to hear. So one parting advice from your side on, if you were to say a customer success leader who is trying to figure this out now, what would your advice be to do from day one that, operationally you would be much better set up further down the line?
I mean, see, and I don't want to make a generic statement here. It depends a lot on the type of customers that you're working with and the product that you're selling. So the segment that you are working with definitely decides whether it needs to be like entirely through Slack, or whether it needs to be a mix of Slack plus traditional support systems, etc. So in our context, we work with pretty high ACV customers, and we have the luxury of having dedicated Slack channels, because, let's say if you work in the SMB or the commercial space, there are more practical challenges that you may end up with. Now, having said that, I believe there is an option to treat Slack or Microsoft Teams or one of those mediums as an option to, or as an additional channel for the customers to submit tickets. Now, the extent of support that you are going to provide over those new channels, I think that may depend and vary depending on the segments that you're selling into and the type of cadence that is needed to manage your product, etc.
Got it. So depending upon, obviously the ACV and the extent of involvement from your side, you might want to play around with some of those factors and so on. Got it. Is there a segment that you don't offer Slack to, at all, or is it like everyone?
We offer Slack for everyone. So that is, especially we decided to take that path after automating a lot of customer comms through Slack. I mean, when I say customer comms, I'm talking only about the support part of the Slack communications. So once we automated that, we are offering this to every customer. We used to do it even prior to that, but we were not sure whether we would be offering that to every customer after we started scaling up. But till date, it has been going like really well, and we offer Slack to everyone, and we offer support, SLA bound support on Slack to every customer today.
That's great to hear. So, so extremely interesting perspective, Joby. So, I would love to come to Jeff and pick his perspective. So Jeff, what's your? Again, first question is like, did you inherit Slack, or did you get Slack in your org? And now what's your journey been with this as
well? I started Yotascale before we had any customers. So we, when we were working with customers in sort of that pre-sales phase, we were working with them in Slack already. So it became sort of the natural progression to continue working with them when they became customers in Slack. And then as we added more and more customers, it was this sort of similar to what Barrett said, right? As you started in your proof of value, working with them, and it just makes sense to continue that, as you go on. So we've had Slack and been using it for customer support, success, and sales since we started.
Got it. Right. And I mean, is it with all customers, or is it a specific group of customers?
Yeah.
Above ACV and so on? What's the journey been on that side?
Yeah, as a startup, we want to learn from everybody. So for us, it was important to include everyone in feedback. We're still doing that today. I think it does depend on who your customers are. We sell a product that helps our customers manage their cloud costs. So it is like DevOps engineers. The least technical people are finance. So the people that we normally are working with are in Slack already. So it's just like a natural switch in their workflow to come over and talk to us there. So yeah, we use Slack for every customer of ours, and it fits well with the personas that we work with.
And especially during the customer pre-sales and customer success phase, any observations on like what has this helped you with, right, in terms of whether it is like closing things faster or onboarding faster and so on? Any distinct observations on that side?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a level of access. It's almost like from the virtual world that we're in today, you're working in their workspace now. So it's like you are at a desk next to them and you can just shoot them a message. Where otherwise, you're having to search for somebody's email and reach out to them, and you get buried in all the mess. So it comes, there's double edge to that. But I think the access and the visibility that you get is overwhelmingly worth it. In the sales cycle, especially if you have to work with a security person, well, they can just start to get into Slack and you can communicate there. The visibility of the conversation and that there's activity is also really helpful. If you've got stakeholders that are on the customer side that are in the channel, they can see sort of, hey, they're engaging, all these people are working together. I think that helps as well.
Got it. Jeff, just out of curiosity, how long is a typical cycle for you for the first touch point to, let's say, closure of a POV or a POC that you have and to a contract? Just trying to get that thought process in, and like how, and within that process, like how frequent are these interactions on Slack and so on?
Yeah, the whole sales cycle, 3 months probably on average, 6 months, 3 to 6 months. Depending on how complex the deal is, and obviously there's longer ones there too that happen. But generally we get started with the Slack integration once they agree that they want to do a proof of concept. So that's where we create the shared Slack channel. We invite the stakeholders from the customer side, the people who will be involved in the eval, and then we have one engineer from our team, support, and the sales team and success all get added as well. So everybody's going to get some level of visibility into what's going on.
Got it, right? And operationally, like what are some of the things that has helped you, do this more efficiently? And what are things that you've learned over time, which has been helping you?
Helping us with like using Slack, or just helping us in terms of how Slack helps?
Slack as a channel with customers, like, so as you scale this, like what are some of the things that have been helping?
Yeah, and for access for us, right, I can get in contact with stakeholders that I would have harder time getting in contact with through text or email. And again, I think that visibility thing is really helpful. It's like less intrusive than sending a text message for some people. It seems like, even though it pops into your thread and it's right in your face, it often feels less intrusive than like a direct reach out through a text message. So I find that it's more casual, and you can get some more casual conversations, more candid feedback that way as well. As we scale, we want to keep this in place. I think one of the challenges we've run into is that not everybody uses Slack, or some customers are, not yet adopting shared channels. And so then we have the real challenge is we've got this great interaction and communication with this one set of customers, but there's another set that we're struggling to keep and maintain that same type of relationship with. So that's something we're trying to figure out. Out of
curiosity, do you see, I mean, of these two cohorts that you have, right, that you are on Slack with, and then there is a cohort that you're not on, right? Are there distinct differences in terms of hard business metrics like sales cycles or onboarding times and so on. So do you see clear distinctions between the two segments?
Hard to draw direct correlations. I think in general, it tends to be like businesses that are just a little bit slower moving right now, like that aren't allowing for that sort of shared connection. There's concern of financial institutions, more secure organizations that just risk in opening up these communication channels that aren't as clear where the boundaries are between your organization and another. So, it's hard to draw direct correlation, but yeah, I think we definitely see slower cycle times and slower feedback. And, for us, Slack is the first point of contact for most of our customers. So when the customer doesn't have that channel, it's harder for us to know what's going on and feel as in touch and in tune with them. It requires more, emails that aren't as widespread or not as visible to the group, and more meetings as opposed to trying to get some stuff done in Slack and keep those touch points happening.
Got it. Very interesting. And once you offer Slack, do you see, and maybe others can also come in this question, is that once you offer Slack, do you see a drop down in terms of the number of Zoom meetings or number of emails that are going back and forth? Does a lot of communication move there, out of curiosity, and what all have you observed in your setups?
I can go first. Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, and the point in time where that happens for us is in the sales cycle, because you move from a lot of email communication and Zoom meetings to get set up and organized into a Slack channel, where now you're able to do things asynchronously. Everybody's sort of staying up to date on what's happening, and you can still schedule meetings when everything's put together and ready, but you don't have to have a meeting to discuss what you're going to meet about later. So yeah, I found that the conversation moves from email and Zoom pretty significantly into Slack once we get the shared channel set up.
Very interesting. And what have you observed, Barrett, Joby? What are your perspectives on this?
I mean, I echo what Jeff also said. I mean, it's once the companies are on Slack, they are only on Slack. I mean, it's a Slack first culture that we are seeing across all our customers, plus internally too. Once they are on Slack, there's hardly any email conversations. And another good thing is the option to provide immediate responses. I mean, I would say mentally there's this little difference on how the responses get or how even people respond back, on Slack compared to how they would have done on email. So, it kind of goes back into the perception issue and expectation setting that comes out of it, as I discussed earlier. But in general, we are seeing a much better response rate. I mean, it's not only about Chronosphere as a vendor serving some of our customers or as a partner serving some of our customers, but it's a little bit around data that we need from customers too occasionally. So in that area also, we've seen better responses, and kind of helps us onboard the customers faster and provide a better experience.
So interesting. So these are you are dependent on your customers to move them faster, and Slack as a channel just helps you get the information faster from them.
That is correct. Yep, that's an observation that we've had.
Yeah, interesting. And Barrett, your observations on email to Slack, right, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with the also getting some of the things that we need quickly. We've had our product managers be able to get in and really ask questions about features that we're building, and the response is enormously higher than, I think back to when you kind of had to send an email and hope someone responded to a survey. So I think we've seen a lot of success there, and just getting the engagement and feedback to help build something that will end up being better, kind of for everyone. So I think that's been great. So I definitely agree with that second part.
Interesting. And so I do have a few, there are a few questions all of you might also be seeing, and one of them is around SLA. So maybe Barrett, you can come in on this, right, as you have kind of implemented. I mean, Joby, you can chip in as well, but so what about SLAs, right? That's an important, you can set some expectations, but internally, how do you manage it and so on, right? What's the journey on that?
Yeah, for SLAs, we, our SLAs are pretty standard across most of our customers, except for like a few enterprise, but I know the customer success team is fairly small. So what we do is if something is close to like breaching an SLA, or if something hasn't been responded to for, let's say, like 30 minutes, we have a group channel that just says that like notifies the team that something needs to get responded to, because it potentially could breach an SLA. And I think that's good because it just kind of helps prioritize some of the things, and also helps the team, like anyone can kind of jump in, no matter if it's like your assigned channel or not. So for us, we have just notifications that help make sure you're looking at something, prior to anything happening. But we do have different like SLA groups set up for different customers, and then some notifications around them.
Maybe enterprise or like larger ones, which are separate SLAs, and like smaller ones which have separate SLAs and so on. And I'm assuming you're using a tool to kind of manage these SLAs and so on, for kind of staying on top of these things and so on. Interesting. And Joby, the reason why I wanted to come back to you is like, how do these SLAs on Slack, are these the same as the ones on Zendesk, right? And how are they? I mean, just curious how is the entire setup managed and how you've kind of orchestrated this entire thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's all the same in the same SLAs across both Slack as well as our standard support ticketing system. We treat Slack as another channel to submit tickets, and everything else stays the same. Right. And the responses can be either through email or through, when I said email, I meant basically like, the email responses that go back and forth from the support system, or can be the, coming directly to the support system or through Slack. So everything is well synchronized for, from a customer's perspective.
Got it. So there is a question on CSAT, which I can maybe come to Jeff. I think CSAT is an important cog in the wheel, right? As you kind of scale this. So have you tried to use this as a channel to get CSAT, whether it is on tickets or like even more traditional NPS style, right? In terms of how the experience has been and so on. So curious to hear, have you done something like that, or what's the experience been?
Yeah, for us, we have NPS in the product. If we have a ticket that gets escalated to like our actual customer support ticketing system, then there's an opportunity to provide feedback on it at that point. Within the Slack interactions, we don't right now have a way to grab customer satisfaction from Slack interactions.
All right. Barrett, Joby, any of your learnings on this? This was one of the questions that had come in terms of CSAT, or even your thoughts in terms of how you do it and so on.
Yeah, I mean, since Slack is also synchronized with the support system, we use the support system based CSAT, for all practical purposes. We do CSAT, and that's driven through the existing support system itself. And Slack based tickets are, another category of tickets inside the same system. So from a CSAT perspective, nothing changes.
Got it. Thoughts from you, Barrett?
Ours probably, so we're not as integrated, but we kind of send out separate CSAT. It's just not in the form of like, oh, how happy are you with this particular response? So yeah, I think something that we would like to think about, but have kind of like deprioritized for the moment.
Got it. Understood. Got it. So there are a few more questions on, let me kind of see. There was, yeah. So I think just once visibility, one thing, right? So Barrett, from your perspective, you haven't invested in a traditional ticketing system, and your via a tool like ClearFeed, for example, is your core management of requests, right, from your side. And Joby, in your setup, you have a setup where Zendesk is the primary ticketing system, and then you have enabled an integration between Slack and your ticketing system, and like this is just another channel for all practical purposes. Jeff, just wanted to understand, like from your perspective, maybe this was not explicit. I just want to make sure everybody is kind of contextualizing the things in the overall setup as well, right? So, Jeff, in your perspective, what's the overall setup like?
Yeah, I mean, most of our interactions are coming through Slack. So we often they're lightweight asks too, though, right? It's not always like a big major support issue that's coming through Slack. So we have sort of a way of triaging those and treating them differently than if it's something that needs to get escalated and treated as like, oh, this is a bug, this is a feature request. Those get escalated in a different way. Then it's like, oh, I have a question about how something works, or why does it look like this? And you can just sort of quickly type an answer. We don't open a ticket for that. We open a ticket if we have to get engineering involved, or if there's going to be an investigation. Sort of, there's some threshold there that the support agent has an ability to make a decision on. So those tickets can come in through. You can open a support request through email, or like by talking to us in a meeting as well. But the Slack ones sort of have another layer of triage that happens.
Got it. Got it. Very interesting. I think very interesting the different set of setups that everyone has adopted with their scale and then size at this point in time. So I think we're mostly done with all the audience questions. So I think we are also at the top of the time. So this might be a good time to just thank each of you for taking time out and speaking to us in an open forum. The recordings would be available to all the panelists along with the attendees. So you'll get an email right after, maybe in the next few days, on the notes as well as the recording. So thanks again, Jeff, Joby, and Barrett for taking the time out. Very insightful to hear your perspectives. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Bye. Nice to meet you all.
Take care. Bye-bye.